He was biting his nails again. Not in the discreet, controlled way a grown man tries to hide, especially a man who grew up trained to hide every emotion behind a camera-ready smile. No, this was the frantic, rapid, unconscious kind of nail-biting someone does when their whole world is slipping out of their hands and they can't stop it. When every second feels like a countdown. When the phone pressed to their ear carries the weight of their entire identity. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. And that was exactly what was happening to Prince Harry on that quiet California morning. Tell me something. Have you ever had a moment where you heard just one sentence, just a handful of words, and you knew right then that nothing in your life would ever be the same again? That you couldn't stop it, couldn't argue with it, couldn't undo it? That a version of you was ending, even if you didn't want it to? That was the moment Harry found himself in. The call came earlier than any royal call usually came. Not that Harry was on many royal calls these days, but this one wasn't optional. This one wasn't a polite check-in. This one wasn't a friendly update or a soft reminder of protocol. When the palace called like this, so early, so sharply, with a tone that sounded heavy even through the ringing, it meant something serious was about to drop. His thumb was between his teeth before he even answered. He didn't greet them with a hello. Instead, he said only two words that tasted like dread. Is it time? As if he already knew. As if part of him had been waiting for the call, dreading it, hoping it wouldn't come, but sensing the winds had shifted. Because even thousands of miles away, even after stepping down, even after building a life far from palace corridors and press briefings, Harry still knew how to read the signs. A lifetime inside the firm teaches you what the silence means, what the unusually polite tone means, what the sudden formal tone means. It teaches you when something irreversible is about to happen. And today, something irreversible was happening. The voice on the other end didn't answer his question right away. That silence alone said everything. You ever experienced that pause? The one that stretches forever, even though it's only a second long? The one that tells you the answer is something you don't want to hear? That's exactly the pause Harry heard. Then the voice finally said, "There has been a final decision." He froze. His thumb stayed in place, pressed against his lip, but he didn't bite down. His jaw locked. His pulse surged in that strange, painful way where you can hear it echoing inside your head. He didn't even breathe properly. He just sat there, staring at nothing, eyes unfocused, the morning sun pouring through the Montecito windows behind him. A final decision. Those three words changed the air around him. Think about that phrase. Doesn't it always mean something is ending? A job, a relationship, a legacy, a chapter of your life you thought would last forever. Harry felt it instantly. And maybe you're wondering, why now? Why this moment? Why had the palace finally, after all the tension and conflict and distance, reached the point of issuing a final verdict? Why the pressure? Why the urgency? Why the early call? Well, that's where the story gets complicated. Because nothing about this situation was simple. Nothing about Harry's life had been simple for years. Not since the moment he left the firm, not since the interviews, not since the documentaries, not since the public fractures, not since the headlines that refused to let anything go, and definitely not since the whispers that began quietly inside palace walls months ago. This wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow-moving storm. One that began as a light drizzle of royal concerns, then became a steady rain of public pressure, then grew into a full-blown thundercloud of controversy hovering right over Harry's head. And whether he admitted it or not, he felt that storm every day. You can't walk away from the monarchy and expect the past to disappear. The past follows you. The crown follows you. The expectations follow you. Even the title follows you, until the moment it doesn't. Harry swallowed hard. He knew what the call was about. He knew what the final decision meant. He just didn't want to hear it out loud. His breathing became shallow. His foot tapped against the hardwood floor. His free hand tensed into a fist. He had prepared for this, or at least he told himself he had. He thought he could take it. He thought he could shrug it off. But now that the moment was real, now that the voice was on the line, his confidence evaporated. That's the funny thing about reality, isn't it? We always think we're ready for the truth, until the truth actually arrives. Are you certain? Harry whispered. His voice cracked in the middle. Not dramatically, not like in a movie, just a small, tiny break. the kind that slips out when you're trying too hard to sound strong. We are, the voice replied. Another pause. Another shift in the air. Another silent weight dropped on Harry's shoulders. There will be an official statement. That's when Harry's nail-biting returned. Harder. Faster. His teeth pressed into the side of his nail, so sharply it almost hurt. And if you've ever been that nervous, you know exactly why. It's not really about the nail. It's about controlling something. Anything. When everything else feels uncontrollable. He leaned forward. His elbows dug into his knees. He pressed the phone tighter to his ear. What does the statement say? He asked. The voice took a breath. But here's the thing about breaths. They're never just breaths in moments like these. They're announcements. They're warnings. They're a prelude. And this breath was a prelude to the moment Harry had been dreading more than any headline, any argument with his family, any clash with tradition. The Duke of Sussex title will be formally. He shut his eyes. Tight. The words were coming. The ones he didn't want to hear. The ones that would echo for the rest of his life. The Duke of Sussex. A title tied to his wedding. A title tied to his identity. A title tied to his place in the royal hierarchy, even after he stepped back. A title that connected him, symbolically, historically, to everything his life once revolved around. It was about to be taken away. But here's the twist. The palace didn't call him to negotiate it. They didn't call him to discuss it. They didn't call to ask his opinion or hear his defense. They called to inform him. It was already done. And if you've ever been in a situation where people decided something important about you without you, then you already know the kind of sting Harry felt. His chest tightened. His jaw clenched. His thumb was practically raw from his teeth. What about my children? He whispered. Silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that hints there's more he doesn't know. More he hasn't heard yet. More he isn't ready to hear. Harry, the voice finally said, there are additional matters to discuss regarding titles and future representation. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Additional matters. Future representation. Those were heavy words. Words that meant this wasn't just about him. And that's when it hit him fully. Not just the fear, not just the shock, but the enormity of what he was about to lose. His title, his status, his connection, his role, his identity, his legacy. Even the way history would talk about him. Everything was shifting beneath him. He stood up suddenly, pacing the living room, dragging his hand through his hair. He didn't know where to put the panic. He didn't know where to put the anger. He didn't know where to put the disbelief. But we're not here yet. Not at the anger. Not at the disbelief. Not at the moment he finally snaps. We're still at the beginning. The moment where everything breaks, but nothing is said out loud yet. The voice on the call continued. There are other parties joining this call shortly, it said. And Harry froze again, because he knew exactly what that meant. Other parties, other voices, other decisions already made. This wasn't just an update. This was a meeting, and it wasn't a meeting he requested. His hand trembled slightly. He pulled the phone away from his ear, stared at the screen, then put it back. Because if other voices were joining the call, there was one voice he feared hearing most of all. One voice that carried more weight, more authority, more finality than any other. His father's, King Charles, the man whose tone alone could imply a century of royal duty. The man who now held the power to cut a symbolic cord with a simple signature. Harry wasn't ready to hear that voice. But he was about to. Because the next sound he heard wasn't static, wasn't wind, wasn't shifting papers. It was the click of another line joining the call. And then, a voice spoke. A familiar voice. A father's voice. A king's voice. Harry. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. He almost dropped the phone. That's how violently the sound of his father's voice cut through him. A sharp, precise slice of reality breaking through the panic that was already running wild in his mind. You ever have one of those moments where your stomach just drops for no reason except instinct? Where your body reacts before your thoughts catch up? That was Harry in that split second. His grip tightened, his breath caught, and his heart delivered one heavy thump that echoed inside his chest. Harry, King Charles repeated, softer this time, but somehow even heavier. Why does it always happen like that? Why is it that the quiet tone, not the loud one, carries the most weight? Maybe it's because you can't hide behind softness. Maybe it's because softness means seriousness. Maybe it's because you know someone chose their calm carefully, and that's scarier than anger. Harry swallowed. His throat felt dry. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Are you there? Charles asked. What could Harry say? He was there. Physically. Standing in his Montecito living room with sunlight creeping across the floorboards, casting that warm California glow that should have felt comforting. But mentally, emotionally, he was standing somewhere much colder. Somewhere closer to the palace hallways he thought he'd left behind forever. Yes, Harry finally managed to whisper. I'm here. Another silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was loaded, stretched. It felt like someone had placed a giant velvet curtain between them, heavy and suffocating, just waiting to be pulled aside. Then Charles continued. I know this is difficult, he said. Difficult. That word landed wrong. It felt too small, too polite, like calling a hurricane a bit windy. But Harry didn't correct him. He couldn't. His mind was spinning too fast. Before we go any further, Charles added, I want you to know that this is not personal. Harry blinked. Not personal? How could this not be personal? How could removing his title, a title he'd held since the day of his wedding, a title given publicly, joyfully, symbolically, not be personal? But again, he didn't say anything. Not yet. Dad, Harry said quietly, why now? And there it was. The question. The one sitting beneath all the panic, all the fear, all the nail-biting. Why now? Why today? Why this moment? Charles didn't answer immediately. Instead, another voice joined the call. Harry, it's me. Harry froze. Because this time, it wasn't a palace advisor. It wasn't a secretary. It wasn't some communications official calling to read a statement. It was Prince William. And Harry felt it. That old instinctive tension in his chest. That mix of familiarity and distance. That strange emotional echo only siblings can trigger, especially siblings who share a complicated history. Harry closed his eyes. He wasn't ready for this. Not today. Not with everything else happening. But the call wasn't asking for permission. Harry, William said again. We need to talk about what happened the past few months. There it was, the hint. The shadow behind the decision. The beginning of the real explanation. Harry's brows knit together. What happened? He asked. What changed? I haven't done anything different. He meant it sincerely. He truly believed it. But the pause that followed told him William didn't see things the same way. Harry, William said slowly, the issue isn't what you've done recently. It's what's accumulated. You ever hear a sentence that doesn't sound dramatic on its own, but somehow manages to hit like a punch to the chest? This was one of those sentences. What's accumulated? Not one action, not one moment, not one misstep, but a pile of them, built over time, layered by perception, pressure, and expectations. Charles spoke again. There has been concern, he said. More than you may realize. Harry felt his jaw tighten. Concern. That word again. More polite softness masking the severity beneath. What concern? Harry asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Neither answered immediately, which somehow made it even worse. Then William cleared his throat. This isn't about blaming you, he said. It's about the monarchy, the institution, and how your role, or lack of role, has affected things. Harry's heart thumped again. My lack of role, he repeated. I stepped back. That was the whole point. I made it clear I didn't want to be an active working royal. And we respected that, William replied. But the title you hold still ties you to the institution publicly. The public doesn't separate you from it. They never have. Harry felt heat rise in his chest. Not anger exactly, not yet. More like disbelief, mixed with the sting of feeling misunderstood. So, because people won't separate me from it, Harry said, you're removing me from it entirely? Charles sighed softly. Harry heard the exhaustion in it. Not frustration, exhaustion. And somehow that hurt even more. This isn't punishment, Charles said gently. It's preservation. Preservation. What a word to use. Preservation of what? Harry asked. The monarchy? The image? Your legacy? Of peace, Charles said. Of clarity. Roles must be clear. Harry felt the pressure behind his eyes intensify. He sank onto the arm of the couch, rubbing his forehead. Was this always the plan? He asked quietly. From the moment I stepped back, was this already decided? No, Charles answered firmly. It wasn't. But things have changed recently. Here we go again. The same looming shadow. The same implication that there was more happening than Harry realized. What changed? Harry pressed. Tell me. Charles hesitated. William exhaled sharply. Harry braced himself. Then William finally spoke. There was an internal review, he said. A long one. A detailed one. Not about your choices alone, but about what your title represents, how it's used, and how it affects the institution. The institution. Another phrase Harry had heard his entire life. Another reminder of the invisible machinery behind the crown. I never misused my title, Harry said. Not once. We're not accusing you of that, William replied quickly. This isn't about misconduct. It's about misalignment. Misalignment. Another calm, diplomatic word that still managed to sting. Harry leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Montecito felt far away in that moment. California sunshine or not, he felt the chill of London creeping through the phone. So that's it, Harry murmured. A review decided my future. Not just the review, Charles corrected. Many factors, many conversations. Harry's voice dropped lower. Who was involved? Another pause. Another curtain of silence. Senior advisors, Charles said. Legal experts. Communications staff. And Harry pushed. And William added carefully. Certain members of the family. Harry's stomach tightened. Which members? He asked. But neither answered that. And that silence, that refusal, spoke volumes. He wasn't supposed to know. Not yet. Not at this stage of the call. Harry, Charles said, the decision is final. The title will be relinquished respectfully, formally, and with dignity. Respectfully, formally, with dignity. 3 gentle words masking the sharpest cut he'd ever felt. Harry pressed his palm to his forehead. He could feel the beginnings of panic crawling up his throat. Why didn't anyone tell me earlier? He whispered. Why am I hearing about this now? This time, it wasn't Charles or William who answered. A different voice joined the call. A voice Harry hadn't heard in months. A voice that once carried warmth, comfort, and steady guidance. A voice he never expected to hear today. Because, the voice said calmly, you weren't supposed to know until the very end. Until all parties agreed. Harry froze. His hand slipped off his forehead. His breath caught. His pulse spiked. It was Princess N. And if Princess N was involved, if Princess N was part of the group making the decision, then this was bigger than he ever imagined. Because N didn't play games. She didn't meddle. She didn't waste time. She didn't sugarcoat anything. If she was on the call, it meant the situation had reached a level of seriousness that required her voice. Anton, Harry said, stunned. Yes, she replied calmly. I'm here. He didn't know what to say. Not to her. Not to someone who had always seemed steady, balanced, fair. She continued before he found the words. Harry, this isn't about punishing you, she said. It's about stabilizing the future. Your title carries obligations you haven't fulfilled for years. That gap has created tension, confusion, and public misunderstanding. Harry felt something inside him sink. So you're taking it away, he whispered. We're not taking it, and corrected gently. We're releasing it. Releasing it. Another soft phrase. Another velvet-wrapped blow. Harry, she added, you have built a life outside the institution. A real one. A full one. Holding the title ties you to a world you no longer participate in. That contradiction has finally reached a point where it can't continue. Contradiction. A single word, but one that held 1,000 implications. Harry stared ahead, eyes unfocused, heart pounding. And added one more sentence. A sentence that hit harder than anything before it. There is one more matter we need to discuss with you. Something that affects not just your status, but your children's place in the wider narrative. Harry's entire body went cold. What matter? He asked, barely breathing. But what came next would change everything, and no one, not even Harry, was prepared for it. You ever look back at a moment in your life and realize it never really started there? That the real beginning happened long before? That one shocking day was actually the final chapter of a story unfolding quietly in the background? That's exactly what was happening to Harry. The phone call in Montecito wasn't the first domino. It was the last one to fall. And the chain that led to it began years earlier, tucked between palace protocols, public expectations, brotherly misunderstandings, and the weight of a royal life no one outside the gates could fully understand. Let's rewind. Not to the documentaries. Not to the interviews. Not even to the day he stepped back from royal duties. Earlier. Much earlier. Back to the moments when tension began building silently, like hairline cracks beneath the surface of a porcelain vase. Invisible at first, but fatal over time. Because this story isn't just about a title. It's about everything that came before it. Harry always knew he wasn't the heir. From the moment he could understand words, he understood hierarchy. There was William, the future king, the center of planning, the focus of briefings, the golden spotlight of duty, and there was Harry, the brother who stood slightly to the side. Not ignored, not dismissed, but placed in a category all his own. You ever feel like you're both included and excluded at the same time? Like you're in the room, but not in the room? That's how Harry grew up. Loved, yes. Important, yes. But always in the shadow of the throne he would never approach. He was the spare. Not an insult, just a descriptor. But names shape people, don't they? People sometimes assume Harry hated the term. But that wasn't really it. He didn't hate it. He hated what it represented. Responsibility without authority. Duty without freedom. Expectation without choice. But he also had something William didn't. Flexibility. Personality without pressure. Permission to be imperfect. The world kind of liked Harry that way. The mischievous prince, the bold one, the unexpected one. The one who made headlines, but laughed them off. The one who stumbled, but got back up. The one who felt real. And for a long time, that balance worked. He was the energetic brother. William was the composed one. Harry was the spark. William was the anchor. Different roles, different paths, but still connected. Until they weren't. The truth is, the cracks began long before the public noticed anything. They began in private, in the hallways of Kensington Palace, in briefings, in family meetings where Harry felt his voice slipping in importance as William's grew louder with his rising responsibilities. It wasn't jealousy. Not exactly. Jealousy suggests wanting what someone else has. Harry didn't want to be king. He never did. But he did want clarity. He wanted a direction. He wanted an identity that was his own, not one defined by comparison. You ever feel like you're being measured against someone else's blueprint? Like no matter what you do, you're always too much of this, not enough of that, or simply the other one? That's the kind of pressure Harry lived with quietly for years. Then came the life events that changed everything. The loss of their mother reshaped them both in ways the public never fully understood. William folded inward, more protective, more anchored. Harry exploded outward, seeking meaning, purpose, escape, anything to outrun grief that felt too large for one heart. For a while, they balanced each other, until adulthood pulled them into separate orbits. William married early, settled early, embraced duty early. He grew into the role like someone putting on a well-tailored coat. Hesitant at first, then steady, then fully. He had a partner who understood royal life, who fit into the institution's rhythm almost naturally. Harry watched all of it from slightly behind, slightly beside, slightly outside. Not with envy, with confusion. Where did he fit? What was his place? What did the future look like for someone neither inside nor outside the system? And that's when the first real tension began to simmer, not out of conflict, but out of divergence. William was being shaped by tradition and structure. Harry was being shaped by emotion and instinct. Two paths, two brothers, two destinies neither asked for but couldn't escape. Fast forward. When Harry began seeking a life partner, the palace silently braced itself. Not because they feared who he'd choose, but because they feared what he represented: unpredictability, unconventionality, a willingness to step outside lines drawn long before he was born. Harry didn't just bring someone into the royal family. He brought energy, noise, headlines, questions. And for an institution built on stability, predictability, and carefully controlled narratives, that energy was both exciting and terrifying. When his relationship became public, attention intensified instantly. Suddenly, Harry wasn't the carefree spare. He was the wild card shaping a new narrative, one the palace struggled to contain. But tension didn't explode at once. It simmered, quietly, steadily, like a pot warming on a stove, long before it boils over. And the cracks widened. There were disagreements over press strategies, over formalities, over expectations, over protection, or lack of it, over the pace of everything happening, over which traditions mattered and which could be bent, over how much freedom Harry should have outside the royal bubble. And here's the interesting thing. None of these disagreements were personal at first. They were logistical, practical. strategic. But logistics become personal when family is involved. Imagine trying to navigate a job where your boss is also your father, your coworker is your brother, your performance reviews are written by the public, and the rulebook is centuries old. Now imagine wanting something different, something modern, something human. Where do you fit? That's the question Harry carried quietly for years. And William carried a different question. How do you maintain order when the person disrupting it is someone you love? That's where the contradiction began. The kind that creates friction even in the closest families. The kind that slowly builds into something bigger. By the time Harry stepped back from royal duties, the pot wasn't just simmering, it was boiling. And even though the world saw the explosion, the truth is, the pressure had been building long before the announcement. But stepping back didn't end the tension. It magnified it, because now there were two worlds. The world Harry built, free, expressive, emotional, independent. And the world he left, structured, historic, symbolic, scrutinized. And the title Duke of Sussex sat awkwardly between them, like a bookmark stuck between two very different chapters. Harry didn't see it that way at first. To him, it was just a title, meaningful, yes, but not defining. To the palace, though, titles represent roles. Roles represent responsibility. Responsibility represents stability. And stability represents the monarchy's survival. Two interpretations, two truths, both valid, both incompatible. And that's why this tension wasn't caused by one moment, one interview, one statement, or one argument. It was caused by the slow drift, the way two brothers who once moved in sync began walking in opposite directions without realizing how far apart they'd gotten. That drift seeped into everything. Family gatherings, public appearances, private conversations, decision-making, public expectations, media narratives, international perception, internal pressure. So by the time the palace began reviewing roles and titles, long before Harry knew anything was happening, the tension had already reached a point where something had to change. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It was inevitability. A slow-moving inevitability built over decades. And that's the part Harry never fully understood. Not until the call with his father, his brother, and Princess Anne. Because while he saw the decision as sudden, shocking, personal, the palace saw it as overdue. Think of it like a bridge. If one pillar weakens, nothing happens. If a second cracks, you brace it. If a third loosens, you patch it. But if all three weaken slowly, quietly, over years, eventually the bridge needs to be rebuilt. That's exactly how the palace saw the title situation. Not as a dramatic confrontation, but as structural reinforcement. And that's why Chapter 1, the call, never should have surprised Harry as much as it did, though emotionally, of course it did. Because no matter how much something builds, the moment it collapses still feels sudden. As Charles, William, and then continued speaking on the call, Harry felt the weight of years pressing down on him. He didn't just hear the decision. He heard every underlying conversation, every unstated concern, every silent expectation he never knew existed. Why didn't anyone tell me earlier? He asked again. But deep down, a part of him already knew the truth. Because if he had known earlier, he would have felt the distance sooner. He would have felt the shift sooner. He would have felt the break sooner. And nothing hurts more than realizing a fracture existed long before you noticed the crack. Harry rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed. His voice was low when he finally asked, "So what does this decision mean for everything else?" And that question, was the moment the temperature of the call changed. The moment when the air grew heavier. The moment the calm softened into something more serious. Because the decision wasn't just about Harry's title. There were ripple effects, unspoken details, future implications. And Princess Anne, who had been silent for several seconds, broke that silence with the single sentence that made Harry's pulse spike. "It means we must now discuss the implications for your children, starting with what the palace discovered in the internal review." Harry's eyes widened. "What did you discover?" he asked. But the answer was something no one was expecting, not even Harry, and it was about to reshape everything he thought he knew. Have you ever wondered what happens behind closed palace doors? The corridors no tourist sees, the rooms no camera films, the conversations that never make the headlines? Most people think royal decisions happen in grand public moments, a press release, a formal statement, a ceremonial announcement. But the reality is far more intricate, far more meticulous, and far more strategic than anyone could imagine. For Prince Harry, the revelation of the palace review was both shocking and, in hindsight, inevitable. But the moment the call came, he had no idea how deeply it had been prepared, or how carefully every word, every assessment, every consideration had been measured before landing on his life-changing decision. It started months earlier. The palace had quietly initiated an internal review, something Harry knew nothing about. Not a hint, not a whisper, not a subtle notification. It was invisible, like the slow tick of a clock in a silent room, unnoticed until it suddenly rings loud and clear. Why keep a review like this secret? Because the palace operates on tradition, precision, and the idea of controlling perception. Every title, every role, every public connection carries weight, historical, symbolic, and personal. And the Duke of Sussex title, though only recently granted, was more than a ceremonial designation. It was a symbol of lineage, of heritage, of public perception, and as such, required scrutiny when one member stepped back from duties. The review was conducted by a small circle: senior advisors, constitutional lawyers, communications directors, and one or two long-standing palace insiders with decades of institutional knowledge. They analyzed everything. Not just Harry's behavior, but historical precedents, public reaction, ceremonial obligations, and the subtle messaging embedded in every appearance he had made since stepping back. Harry would never have guessed how thorough it was. They examined photos of his appearances, transcripts of interviews, social media interactions, press coverage, even charity engagements that seemed insignificant at the time. They looked at every event where Harry's presence implied representation of the crown and asked a simple but critical question: does this align with the responsibilities tied to the title? The answer, in their judgment, had slowly drifted toward no. You might wonder, how can a title be misaligned when someone isn't actively using it? That was the palace's dilemma. Titles aren't just ornamental. They are symbols of authority, connection, and responsibility. When someone carries a title but lives primarily outside the system, the public sees a contradiction. A duke who is not participating in the duties his title implies becomes a confusing figure. For the monarchy, confusion is a risk, and the institution is built on clarity. The review also considered precedent. The palace looked back through decades, even centuries, at instances when titles were removed or restructured. Rare examples existed, but they were instructive. Titles tied to particular roles could be revoked when those roles ceased to be fulfilled. But here was the twist. The palace realized that, unlike historical cases, Harry was still very visible to the public. He wasn't completely absent. He engaged in charity events, made public appearances, and maintained a media presence. This visibility made the contradiction more pronounced. One advisor even compared it to a painting. Imagine a masterpiece carefully framed and displayed, but with a section of the canvas painted over in a way that doesn't match the original design. Even if the majority is perfect, that inconsistency is noticeable, and it affects the perception of the whole work. That, the palace concluded, was Harry's situation. But there was more. The review uncovered subtle, layered issues regarding representation. How was the title affecting Harry's family? His children? How did the public interpret his actions? Did the existence of the title imply a continuing authority he no longer exercised? Did it confuse foreign dignitaries or charitable partners? Each question carried weight. Each answer created ripple effects. What's fascinating, and perhaps cruelly ironic, is that the review itself became a test of Harry's identity. Not his character, not his intentions, but his identity. Was he still Duke of Sussex in a meaningful sense, or was the title becoming a vestige of a life he had already left behind? Harry, of course, would never have framed it this way. To him, the title was personal, symbolic, a connection to milestones, to love, to memories. But the palace viewed it as functional, institutional, strategic. And when those perspectives clash, you get tension, you get stress, you get a phone call that shakes your world. By the time the internal review reached its final stages, several conclusions were clear. Harry's public visibility conflicted with the absence of institutional duties. The title implied authority he no longer exercised, creating potential misunderstandings. The symbolic connection to the monarchy needed to align with present realities, not past arrangements. The long-term stability of the institution required clarity on every title holder, especially high-profile ones like the Duke of Sussex. The advisors debated every word. They crafted scenarios, predicted public reactions, and considered how each decision would resonate both inside and outside the family. It was painstaking, exhausting, strategic on a level most people cannot imagine. And through it all, Harry remained unaware. Until that morning in Montecito, when the call arrived. This was not just a phone call. It was the culmination of months of meticulous work, careful consideration, and quiet decision-making. It was a moment Harry had no way of anticipating, and that shock, that sudden realization, drove the panic in his nails, in his heartbeat, in his breath. And yet, the review contained secrets even beyond the public's comprehension. Certain details, known only to a few insiders, were intentionally withheld until the final discussion. The reason? To avoid any attempt at preemptive negotiation or influence. Harry could not prepare for the full weight of the decision. The palace needed the moment of revelation to be absolute, immediate, and complete. Imagine that for a moment. Your life-altering decision being constructed for months behind the scenes, while you remain unaware, thinking your existence is entirely your own. That is the reality Harry faced. Then there was the second layer. A hidden element in the review, one that Harry would only discover in later conversations, revealed potential implications for his children. Nothing alarming in detail, but a symbolic consideration that influenced how the title would be framed post-decision. The advisors concluded that clarity for future generations was paramount. Harry's choices could not create ambiguity for the next generation, even if it hurt him personally. And now you might ask, could Harry have prevented this? Could he have influenced the review, inserted his voice, made the palace reconsider? The answer is complicated. To a degree, yes. But the palace had anticipated that. They built the process in such a way that the decision would be based on objective assessment, historical precedent, and institutional necessity, not negotiation or persuasion. The goal was clarity, not compromise. Which leads us to the final moment of the review, the step that set the stage for the phone call. A private, highly controlled briefing among Charles, William, and Anne, where all evidence, all precedents, all arguments were summarized. The meeting lasted hours, with the sole purpose of arriving at a decision that would be unambiguous and enforceable. It was formal. It was deliberate. It was final. And then, after that long deliberation, the call went out to Harry. It was abrupt. It was shocking. It was a culmination of silent months of preparation, the unseen storm finally making landfall. Harry's mind couldn't absorb it all at once. He felt the weight of years, decades even, pressing down in a single instant. And that's what made him bite his nails, not just the fear, but the recognition that the consequences had been carefully measured long before he even realized he was part of the equation. And yet, the final piece remained. The part the palace deliberately left for the live conversation, the element that would make Harry gasp in surprise and uncertainty. Because the review was not just about the title. It was about identity, perception, and the bridge between past, present, and future. And the bridge, the advisors knew, was fragile. Fragile enough that one misstep in communication could escalate emotions. One word could create headlines. One reaction could redefine the narrative. And that's exactly what happened next. The moment Harry heard the next sentence on the call, the one that revealed not just the decision but its deeper implications, he understood the full weight of the review. He wasn't just losing a title. He was confronting the careful, deliberate design of months of palace strategy, a design intended to protect the institution, even at the cost of personal pain. He had no choice but to listen, no choice but to react, no choice but to realize that some decisions, however logical, feel like thunderbolts when they land. And the thunderbolt was only beginning to strike. Meghan Markle had been pacing for hours. You might think the drama always revolves around the palace halls, the public statements, or the official phone calls. But in reality, the intensity often simmers behind the scenes, in quiet rooms with only whispers, screens, and the hum of strategy keeping people awake at night. And that's exactly where Meghan found herself. Hours before Harry's phone buzzed in Montecito, Meghan had been consulting advisors, reviewing statements, and plotting what she believed would protect him. And, by extension, herself. It wasn't about vanity, not entirely. It was about survival, influence, perception, control. Because when your life is so publicly scrutinized, control becomes oxygen. Without it, every decision, every word, every move feels like walking on a tightrope stretched over fire. She didn't expect the call. She didn't expect the decision. She didn't expect the finality of it all. And yet, the palace had anticipated everything, including her reactions. Here's the twist you might not realize. Meghan's attempts to influence the palace backfired spectacularly. She had built what she thought was a shield of strategy. Carefully worded emails, scheduled media engagements, even subtle leaks to sympathetic journalists. Every piece of communication was designed to steer the narrative in a way that would soften the impact for Harry. Or so she believed, but the palace had already seen it. All of it. Every nuance, every calculated sentence, every media move. They didn't just read her strategies, they analyzed them. And in doing so, they realized that some of Meghan's actions were actually accelerating the very decision she feared. It's an ironic truth. Sometimes, the harder you try to control the outcome, the faster events move against you. When Harry finally picked up the call, Meghan had already sensed something was wrong. Her instincts are sharp, sharper than most give her credit for. She had spent years navigating public perception, media storms, and royal expectations. And she felt the tension in the air long before the words officially landed. Her first instinct was to act. She crafted messages, drafted statements, and considered reaching out directly to senior palace officials, an almost audacious move, even for someone of her experience. She wanted to preempt the decision, to mitigate the fallout. But preemption is risky in a system designed for hierarchy, protocol, and tradition. One wrong move could escalate the situation instead of calming it. And that's exactly what happened. Meghan's communications, though well-intentioned, became a subtle signal of urgency to the palace. To them, it wasn't just strategy, it was confirmation. Confirmation that the title in question was creating tension, confusion, and potential for public misunderstanding. Every effort to protect Harry was interpreted as a warning sign that the role required clarification. Meanwhile, Harry was unaware of the storm brewing on Meghan's side. He was focused on the conversation, the revelation, and the weight of the title slipping through his fingers. Every word Charles, William, and in spoke reverberated through him like a drumbeat he couldn't escape. And Meghan? She was planning the next move, already thinking several steps ahead. But here's the twist. Sometimes planning several steps ahead means you misjudge the first step entirely. By the time the palace call reached its climax, Meghan realized her carefully constructed strategies were not protecting Harry. They were highlighting the urgency of action. The palace had already concluded the review, debated it, finalized it. Her maneuvers had no influence on the ultimate decision. In fact, they had unintentionally confirmed its necessity. She felt at the moment she heard Harry's reaction on the call. His disbelief, his panic, the frantic motion of his hands, the nail-biting, the way his voice wavered when he tried to speak. She knew, in that instant, that the palace's timing had been perfect. And painfully, she understood she could have changed nothing. It's a lesson in control, or the illusion of it. You can plan, plot, and calculate every angle, but some forces are simply larger than your strategies. Some decisions are designed to happen on their own timetable, regardless of human intervention. Her emotions were complicated. Anger, frustration, guilt, and helplessness mingled into a tight knot of tension. She loved Harry, supported him, and had spent years navigating this complex world with him. Yet in that moment, she was acutely aware of her limitations. Not because of lack of effort, because she had tried everything, but because the palace's machinery is unyielding, its processes deliberate, its timelines exacting. Then came the next blow, realization. Even if she had successfully influenced the palace, even if she had subtly redirected the decision, Harry would still face a fundamental truth. The title was more than a word. It was a symbol, and symbols, once misaligned, require correction. A title cannot merely exist. It must represent a role that aligns with duty, visibility, and public perception. She felt a pang of irony. All her efforts had been aimed at softening impact, yet the palace didn't see the effort, they only saw the discrepancy. Every carefully drafted email, every planned media engagement, every strategic conversation had inadvertently highlighted the gap between role and title. And the consequences were immediate. Harry was on the call. The words landed. The weight descended. And Meghan, watching from the sidelines, realized that the finality of the decision was absolute. Not a negotiation, not a discussion, not a choice. Done. Completed. Official. That's when strategy became hindsight. Have you ever felt that way? Where your best intentions inadvertently create the exact opposite effect. Where your actions, though logical in your mind, accelerate the very outcome you fear. That's what Meghan felt in that moment. Her thoughts raced. What next? How would Harry react? Could she soften the blow? Could she control perception, at least publicly, after the fact? Or would the palace narrative dominate the story before she even had a chance to influence it? The reality was daunting. And yet, Meghan is nothing if not resilient. Her mind shifted rapidly from shock to calculation. Even in that tense, uncertain moment, she was thinking 2 steps ahead, not just about Harry, but about the family, the public, and the story that would unfold. But here's the twist. No amount of planning could have fully prepared her for what happened next. The palace had anticipated reactions, considered strategies, evaluated media narratives, and still, there was one element they hadn't fully accounted for: human emotion. Harry's panic, his nail-biting, his disbelief, the way he flinched at certain phrases, hesitated at others, and spoke quietly to himself when no one could see. These weren't calculations. These weren't strategic moves. These were raw, unfiltered reactions. The exact kind of response that defies preparation, that throws even the most meticulous plan off course. And Meghan, seeing this, felt both helpless and awed. Helpless because she could not intervene. Awed because, despite the strategy and planning, the humanity of the situation still held its own power. It was a lesson neither she nor Harry would forget. Strategy can guide events, but it cannot replace emotion. Influence can shape perception, but it cannot stop impact. And even the most carefully laid plans can backfire when human hearts are involved. She realized that the palace decision, though logical, deliberate, and meticulously planned, was also now a personal test. Not just for Harry, not just for her, for the family, for public perception, and for the delicate balance between duty and humanity. And so, as the call progressed, Meghan sat quietly, processing, watching, strategizing, feeling the sting of reality and the inevitability of the outcome. She had tried, she had planned, she had acted, but in that instant, she understood one undeniable truth. Sometimes, the system moves faster than strategy. Sometimes, the plan backfires despite your best intentions. Sometimes, the moment arrives, and all you can do is hold your breath and watch. And that's exactly what Meghan did. Until the next revelation hit. A revelation that would change everything about the narrative she thought she controlled. A revelation that Harry had yet to hear. A revelation that would leave both of them questioning everything they believed about control, influence, and the limits of strategy. And that revelation was coming. Faster than anyone expected. Every storm has a trigger. A single, seemingly small event that sets a chain reaction in motion. For Prince Harry, the incident that prompted the palace's final review of his Duke of Sussex title was exactly that kind of storm. Not dramatic at first glance. Not necessarily headline-worthy by itself. But once it collided with existing tensions, historical precedent, and unspoken expectations, it became the spark that ignited a sequence no one could ignore. You might wonder, how could one incident have such a monumental effect? How can a single act or revelation escalate to a formal palace review that ultimately leads to the removal of a title? The answer lies in the nature of the monarchy itself. Symbols, perceptions, and roles are inseparable. A breach in one small place can ripple across decades of tradition. It began quietly. Harry had been attending a charity event, one of the few where he appeared publicly in his capacity as Duke of Sussex, despite having stepped back from official duties. On the surface, it was harmless. Speeches, photo ops, handshakes. Everything was perfectly polite. Yet beneath the surface, something subtle and consequential occurred. A misstep, some would call it. A minor deviation, others might say. But in the palace, even small deviations are magnified. A gesture, a word, an unguarded moment captured on camera or overheard by the wrong person. During this particular event, Harry, trying to engage warmly with the attendees, unintentionally sparked a reaction that revealed the persistent gap between his symbolic title and his actual role. An unguarded comment, a phrase he used casually, made its way into the press. Headlines interpreted it as a contradiction. A duke publicly detached from institutional responsibilities. Social media buzzed. Analysts debated the implications. And the palace took notice. But the real impact wasn't immediate. It wasn't the event itself. It was what the palace realized afterward. The title, which had been meant to honor Harry's role in the royal family, now carried a weight of expectation he was no longer fulfilling. A gap had emerged between perception and reality. And perception, in the public eye, can be as binding as law. You ever see a crack in a bridge and think it's insignificant, only to find later that the crack has compromised the structure's stability? That's exactly how the palace interpreted the incident. A minor, public misalignment became evidence of a structural issue. Senior advisors convened, discreetly but urgently. Lawyers analyzed the implications. Communications teams assessed public perception. And members of the family discussed the potential consequences. What started as a seemingly isolated incident became the central focus of months-long deliberation. Harry, of course, remained unaware. He saw the event as just another appearance, another opportunity to connect with a cause he cared about. But the palace saw something different. They saw a test case. They saw evidence of the challenge in maintaining clarity and consistency in the public narrative. And here's where it gets interesting. The incident revealed more than just a gap between title and duty. It exposed underlying vulnerabilities in the institution's communication strategy. If the public perceived a duke operating outside expected responsibilities, what did that say about the family's ability to maintain order, clarity, and authority? One misinterpreted moment, combined with media amplification, had the potential to undermine years of careful messaging. That's when the palace made a strategic decision: conduct a comprehensive review of Harry's title. Not to punish, not to shame, but to assess alignment, evaluate risk, and ensure stability. Every minor misalignment, every contradiction, every nuance was considered. And here's the kicker. The review wasn't just about Harry. It was about his role in the broader narrative, including his children, his public appearances, and his influence in shaping the family's image abroad. The incident revealed gaps that could have far-reaching consequences if left unaddressed. So, in a sense, this small moment at a charity event, a phrase spoken casually, a gesture misunderstood, a perception misaligned, became the catalyst for an internal review that changed everything. You ever think about how life works like that? One small choice, one tiny act, can have consequences you never intended. Sometimes, the universe compiles months, years, decades of buildup, and then delivers the consequence in one unexpected flash. That was Harry's reality. The review that followed was meticulous. Advisors, lawyers, and family members examined every detail, every nuance, every past appearance, every public engagement. And slowly, a picture emerged. A picture that painted the title as misaligned with current roles, responsibilities, and visibility. The small incident had magnified an existing structural tension, turning it into an undeniable justification for action. By the time the review reached the final stages, the palace had a clear understanding. The Duke of Sussex title, though meaningful historically and personally, could no longer represent Harry's current position without creating confusion, misperception, and public scrutiny. And so, the palace prepared the final call. Harry had no idea this had been building for months. He only knew what he felt, the sudden weight pressing down on him during the call, the panic in his chest, the instinctive nail-biting, the helplessness that comes from realizing a part of your identity has been quietly reevaluated without your knowledge. And Meghan's attempts to intervene, her strategies, her media guidance, her subtle influence, couldn't reverse the momentum. The palace's machinery had been moving long before she even knew there was a problem. Every move she made had been anticipated, every argument prepared for. Every potential pushback accounted for. That's the irony of control. Sometimes, no matter how carefully you plan, the forces at play are larger than any single individual. And sometimes, the event that seems minor, a misinterpreted comment, a gesture, a phrase, can be the catalyst that sets everything in motion. So when Harry heard the final words on that call, words that confirmed the removal of his title, he wasn't just reacting to a single decision. He was reacting to the accumulation of moments, decisions, misperceptions, and incidents, all converging in one unavoidable, life-altering instant. But what made the situation even more intense, the part that neither Harry nor Meghan could have predicted, was the revelation that followed immediately after. The palace had one final, hidden detail to reveal, something they had kept from him until the very last moment. Something that would change not only his perception of the decision, but also the way he viewed his own identity, his family, and his future. And that revelation was about to surface. In a way that would shock him completely, he had stayed silent for months. Silent during the interviews. Silent during the media speculation. Silent while Harry navigated his new life across the Atlantic. Silent while every headline seemed to pit them against each other. Every rumor questioning loyalty. Every public debate dissecting their relationship. But silence has a breaking point. And for Prince William, that point came long before Harry even realized it. You ever reach a point with someone close to you where silence no longer protects, where restraint no longer feels like strength, where holding back feels like betrayal? That's what William had reached. It wasn't easy, not even close. He had been groomed for patience, trained for diplomacy, shaped by decades in the public eye. But even the most disciplined patience has limits. Even the calmest demeanor has cracks. For William, the cracks began to appear quietly. Subtle disagreements, minor frustrations, small incidents he brushed off publicly but stored privately. Moments when Harry's behavior, though innocent or well-intentioned, conflicted with expectations, traditions, or the perception of the monarchy. Each minor event was a drop of water in a slowly filling bucket. And then came the tipping point. William watched as Harry's independence flourished. The public appearances, the charity events, the interviews, the media presence, all outside the framework of the royal institution. At first, William understood. He appreciated Harry's desire to carve his own path, to live freely, to build a life beyond the constraints of protocol. But as the months passed, he realized something unsettling. Harry's independence, while admirable, created tension and confusion for the monarchy. It created uncertainty, misalignment, and a perception that responsibilities were being ignored. Have you ever loved someone but been frustrated by them at the same time? Love them so deeply that you care enough to be honest, but frustrated because their actions seem to threaten the very structure you believe is essential? That's what William felt. He had tried subtle interventions first, gentle guidance, private conversations, hints, suggestions. But Harry's world was far away, both geographically and emotionally. The messages sometimes reached him, sometimes they didn't. And when they did, they were often misunderstood, dismissed, or overshadowed by Harry's desire to maintain independence. The breaking point, William realized, was inevitable. And that's when the internal discussions began. Behind palace doors, he and Charles debated. Advisors were consulted. The potential removal of the Duke of Sussex title was considered not as a punitive measure, but as a structural one. A measure designed to restore clarity and protect the integrity of the monarchy. Every argument, every precedent, every historical example was carefully weighed. And in that deliberation, William found himself reluctantly advocating for action. It wasn't personal, not in the way outsiders would assume. He didn't wish harm on Harry. He didn't want to hurt his brother. But duty and loyalty had shifted. Protecting the institution meant making decisions even when they caused emotional pain. Imagine being in William's position, having watched your brother struggle, having loved him your entire life, and yet knowing that protecting the broader family requires a decision that will inevitably inflict personal anguish. Could you do it? Could you carry the weight of being the messenger and the enforcer? That's the tension William carried. And then came the call. Harry had no idea that William had been preparing for this moment for months. That every carefully measured word, every pause, every phrase spoken calmly on the call had been rehearsed, reviewed, and debated internally. that the voice on the line was not just a brother speaking, but a brother embodying the weight of duty, the burden of responsibility, and the fear of hurting someone he loved. When William spoke, he tried to balance emotion with diplomacy. Every sentence was carefully chosen to convey truth without malice, to deliver the finality of the palace decision without crossing into cruelty. But human emotion cannot be completely controlled, and even the most practiced speaker reveals cracks. Harry sensed them immediately: the subtle hesitations, the inflection in William's voice, the slight tension underlying the calm words. It was familiar, a voice he knew so well, yet one carrying weight and authority he had not experienced before. And then came the moment that would define the call. William explained the reasoning behind the title removal, not as accusation, not as judgment, but as necessity. Every word reinforced the inevitability of the decision, the logic of the palace review, and the broader implications for the monarchy. Every phrase was deliberate. Every pause was weighted with meaning. Harry's reaction was instantaneous: confusion, shock, panic, nail-biting, breathing shallow, hands trembling. And yet beneath the panic, a flicker of understanding.